Welcome to Crossroads. A Chinese spy has been convicted in New York. Now, this individual, who is known as a pro-democracy activist, right? He infiltrated their circles. He was found to be providing information on Chinese dissidents to the CCP. Similar cases are being increasingly uncovered in the US, where the regime is finding ways to extend its surveillance and its human rights abuses outside of China. Now, this is the official statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office. They say this: Su Jun Wang, an academic and author who helped start a pro-democracy organization in Queens, New York, that opposes the current communist regime in China, was convicted today by a federal jury in Brooklyn on all 4 counts of an indictment charging him with acting and conspiring to act as an agent of a foreign government without prior notification to the U.S. Attorney General, criminal possession, identification, and making false statements to law enforcement. It says that Wang's co-defendants, and this is interesting, in the espionage and transnational repression scheme are Feng He, Jie Ming Li, and Keijing Liu, are officials from China's Ministry of State Security. So they actually indicted in this several officials with the MSS, basically the CCP's equivalent of like a combination of the FBI and the CIA. One of the main intel branches of the Chinese Communist Party were just indicted in this. It knows that they remain at large, and when sentenced, Wang, the individual who was charged, faces up to 25 years in prison. It notes that Wang is a naturalized U.S. citizen of Chinese descent and one of the founders of the pro-democracy Hu Yaobang and Zhao Ziyang Memorial Foundation. It's an organization located in Flushing, Queens, which notably, in the early days of my work, as a journalist investigating Chinese spy networks, that was where I focused a lot of my work because there's a lot of them there. It notes that this is in Queens, and it's a note that the members of this organization are well-known pro-democracy dissidents who oppose the current Chinese government of the PRC, People's Republic of China. But instead promoting democracy in the PRC, Wang, this individual, at the direction of the PRC government, the CCP, right, of their officials, used his position within the Memorial Foundation and his status within the Chinese diaspora community to collect information about prominent activists, academics, and dissidents, and reported that information to the PRC government. In other words, what he did was got access to this pro-democracy circle and then used that access, pretending like he was supporting democracy, to go and spy on all these other Chinese dissidents. And it said at the MSS's direction, Ministry of State Security, Wang gathered information on people and groups that the PRC considers subversive, such as Hong Kong democracy protesters, advocates for Taiwanese independence, and Uyghur and Tibetan activists, both in the United States and abroad. And it's that Wang conducted face-to-face meetings with MSS officials while on trips to China, and used WeChat, notably controlled by Chinese companies, to receive orders from his co-defendants and to send and receive written messages and files. It says Wang often memorialized the information he collected in email diaries to be accessed by the MSS. And this is interesting because he was essentially writing status reports to himself over email in the form of diaries. Dear diary, today I met with so-and-so, a prominent democracy activist who lives here, and these are his family members, or who knows what he was writing, right? But notes these diaries included details about Wang's private conversations with prominent dissidents, as well as the activities of pro-democracy activists and human rights organizations. He was reporting on it to the CCP. Now look, this case was actually one of just several arrests that took place back in March of 2022. Wang, this individual, was one of a series of arrests carried out and announced at the same time. This is back when the Department of Justice actually announced it. It said 2 complaints were unsealed and 1 amended complaint was authorized today in federal court in Brooklyn, New York, charging 5 defendants with various crimes related to efforts by the secret police of the People's Republic of China, PRC, to stalk, harass, and spy on Chinese nationals residing in Queens, New York, and elsewhere in the United States. It says all the defendants allegedly perpetrated transnational repression schemes to target U.S. residents whose political views and actions are disfavored by the PRC government, such as advocating for democracy in China. And it said in one of these schemes, the conspirators sought to interfere with federal elections by allegedly orchestrating a campaign to undermine the congressional candidacy of a U.S. military veteran who was a leader of the 1989 pro-democracy demonstrations in Beijing, right? Tiananmen Square massacre, in other words, right? When you had pro-democracy movements there. And in another of these schemes, 3 defendants planned to destroy the artwork of a PRC national residing in Los Angeles, California, that was critical of the PRC government and planted surveillance equipment in the artist's workplace and car to spy on him from China.
These cases expose attempts by the government of the People's Republic of China to suppress dissenting voices within the United States, to demonstrate how the PRC seeks to stalk, intimidate, and silence those who oppose them. In discussing these cases, I want to be very clear that the Department remains focused on the threats and actions of the PRC government and its agents, not the Chinese people or people of Chinese descent, who are often the victims of these crimes.
Now, these spy networks are actually things that I've been personally exposing going back to 2008. I've talked about some of my work before on the show. I've been a journalist with Epoch Times since 2006. I used to be back just doing local news in San Diego, where I'm from. And also at the time, I was being a student and just working on the side. In 2008, I was offered an internship to come work for Epoch Times in New York. And when I went to New York, I got assigned to go to Flushing, Queens, notably where all this is happening. Now, Flushing, Queens, if you've been to New York, it's kind of like the new Chinatown. You take the 7 train all the way to the end in Queens, you get to Flushing, and it's one of the largest Chinese communities. At the time back in 2008, that was an important time because that was right ahead of the Beijing Olympics. They called it the Bloody Olympics because the CCP all around the Olympics was persecuting Tibetans and arresting people and kind of upping its external systems as well to go after dissidents. That was the whole thing that was going on at the time. Now, what ended up happening in 2008 was that alongside this whole kind of external push by the CCP, suddenly there were all these, pro-CCP activists all over the place. And they were beating, they were attacking, they were spitting on anybody who opposed the Chinese Communist Party, in Chinese neighborhoods mostly. And these individuals coming out sometimes literally in the hundreds. They were targeting, notably in Queens at the time, democracy activists, Falun Gong practitioners, Taiwan activists, and so on. And it was shocking. There were videos at the time that, of course, I was there reporting. They were beating people. They were attacking people, tearing people's human rights banners. It was shocking. And when I was doing this work, I was watching this unfold. I'm like, man, what's going on here? All these Chinese people started telling me, oh, those people attacking us are agents of the Chinese Communist Party. And look, at that time, back in 2008, most of this stuff was unknown. There were really no media talking about it. There were very few, if any, government reports. I don't really remember any at the time talking about it. And so there was nothing to go on. I launched an investigation. Actually, my career as an investigative journalist started because of this. And what I ended up uncovering was what's called the United Front Work Department, which includes notably the networks of what people now know as these, secret Chinese police stations. My work in 2008 was exposing those. And the way the CCP does it is this. They send agents to the Chinese consulates, right? So the Chinese consulate in New York, we found, in fact, we got a recording of the Chinese consul general admitting this. They were actually orchestrating these attacks. The Chinese consulate works as like a pseudo-government branch of the CCP, and they regard that as like the provincial government of whatever region they're in. The Chinese consulate in New York is the Chinese government provincial office for the entire, northeast of the United States. The Chinese consulate in Los Angeles, that is the Chinese provincial government for California and several surrounding states. And they run and operate things all around them. What they do is this. They go into Chinese communities and you have what are called tongs. Tongs are like Chinese unions or fraternal organizations and community organizations and things like this. Basically, the tongs one of the reasons why Chinatowns notably are such unique Chinese neighborhoods is because of the Tongs. And the way they essentially worked is this. In traditional Chinese culture, you typically didn't have government below the county level, right? And so below the county level, you had a bottom-up form of government. And those were family associations, those were workers' guilds, those were unions, those were community associations, and so on. They call them Tongs. Groups like, for example, the Fujian American Association, the Shandong Association. They'll even have family name associations, of course, because you only have so many surnames in China, that unite people. And when people started immigrating to the West, the Tongs oftentimes facilitated that. And so the snakeheads, the human traffickers, they also work with the Tongs. The Tongs have a legitimate side where, if your cousin needs a job, they can help him find a job. But they also have an illegitimate side where human trafficking, slave labor, illegal gambling, that kind of stuff. And so the Chinese mafias also work within the Tongs. Not all of them, but some of them. And so what the CCP did was this. Through the United Front Work Department, a branch of the Chinese Communist Party, and then a side branch they have called the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, they go to the Chinese consulates, then they do what they call liaison work. The Chinese military, mainly through the political warfare branch and the propaganda department, provide the narratives to the Chinese agents to do what they call this liaison work. And so they'll send agents to all the Tongs, right? And they'll try to win over these Tongs with business deals, gifts for their family. They'll wine and dine them. They'll hold events. They'll bring them back to China. They'll help them open factories. They'll do import-export jobs and so on. They'll pour money into their Chinese business, and that's the way that they funnel money to these Chinese agents, right? That's how they funnel money in, because Chinese businesses on the U.S. side, it's a black box. On their side, it's a black box. U.S. auditors, they can't get it. And so the CCP knows that, hey, just open up a Chinese factory. It doesn't have to produce anything, doesn't have to build anything. We'll pour in profits, you get money, and you work for us. And that's how it works. Now, these individuals, once they win a Tong working with the CCP, that gives them access to all the Tong members and both their legitimate and illegitimate businesses. So they get access, notably, if it's like a police union, to all the Chinese police workers part of that Tong. If they get access to an oil Tong, right, which there's actually whole oil ones, they get access to all the individuals working for that Tong. If they get access to a student organization, like the Chinese student associations they have, the CSSAs, Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, they get access to all those students and also can follow them with Chinese agents as they work through their careers into parts of the U.S. government, politics, businesses, whatever. And then the CCP can use these connections for economic theft, for espionage, for anything they want. Hey, have your friend who works in X company steal this. Have your friend who works here spy on this person. Have your friend who works here do this. They'll even try to push the careers of certain people to have them rise through the ranks so that they can get what they want. That is how the Tongs work. But they also have a secondary role, and notably too, even within the criminal underworld, because a lot of the Tongs, again, as I mentioned, are tied to Chinese street gangs and mafia organizations, right? The triads, they call them. For example, in New York, one of the main Tongs that works with the Chinese Communist Party, the Fujian American Association, it was known in the past that the Fuqing gang works under them. The Fuqing gang is bigger than it's like one of the top 11 organized crime groups in the world. They're like one of the biggest mafia organizations in the world. They operate in New York. That organization, talking human traffickers, they did the Golden Venture human trafficking operation, notably, which is one of the biggest human trafficking operations ever uncovered. Off the coast of New York, notably, when this big human trafficking ship ran aground and people drowned and died. That's the kind of stuff they do. And so when the CCP gains access to them, they get the legitimate side and they get the illegitimate side. Slave labor, crime, everything. And the CCP uses this to subvert foreign countries. That's how they do it, right? Operated again through the Chinese consulates. The secondary branch I noted, though, is the one that would do a lot of what we're talking about here, monitoring Chinese dissidents and so on. A lot of that would be partly through the United Front, which establishes the network. But the monitoring and so on would take place typically through the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. And what the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office does, which works almost in sync with the United Front, they're arguably, some people argue they're basically the same organization because they even share the same offices. They have databases on every single Chinese person. And they even have databases, notably, on second and third generation Chinese. They will monitor every single Chinese person, Chinese expat, Chinese immigrant, their children, their grandchildren. And they will, of course, watch who's speaking badly about the CCP, who's criticizing the CCP, and they'll use influence within this entire network to do everything they can to attack them, to follow them, to stalk them, to threaten them, the whole 9 yards. And so, my career, a lot of my career, has been dedicated to investigating and exposing these types of operations. And notably, my reports at the time actually were heavily cited by, some of the first government reports on this topic. And of course, it only really kind of started getting traction when people started referring to these overseas Chinese police stations, because that's, of course, a separate system, right? The CCP now is just doing it in the open, where they're actually running these real Chinese police stations, right? These Chinese police stations. Now, the other facet with this is what they call these, Chinese secret police stations. I'll talk about that after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree, one of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges with a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold. You can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. The U.S. Department of Justice has now convicted a Chinese spy in New York. Now, this individual, Sujun Wang, who was known as a pro-democracy activist, was found to be providing information on Chinese dissidents to the Chinese Communist Party. And notably, this case is similar to a lot of other cases that are right now being uncovered. The U.S. government, and actually even in other countries and in the West, they're finally going after this stuff. And there have been a lot of cases recently where they're going after these individuals and they're arresting them. And notably, I should note, they're going after some of the kingpins. Because, the way they work, they have a lot of people who will do, the Chinese Communist Party, they talk about it as like grain of sand type espionage. And the analogy you'll often hear in military and security circles is this. They say that if, let's say, for example, there's a spy operation, everybody's targeting a beach. They say that if the U.S. wants to monitor that beach, they'll have spy satellites and high-tech equipment and so on to monitor it. If the Russians want to do it, they'll send a couple of agents in the dead of night to go and, scoop up a bunch of sand and run off. If the Chinese Communist Party wants to spy on it, they'll send 1,000 people with blankets, and they'll go there to throw their, blankets or towels down or whatever, and they'll carry it back, and then at the end they'll shake off that sand, and they will have collected more than any other agent, because they use a tactic where every single person within that network just gets a little bit. They just steal a little bit, they just pressure a little bit, they just harass a little bit, they just act a little bit as a Chinese agent. They don't go all the way with it. But the collective form of that represents a massive, large-scale operation that undermines the country and represents, in my opinion, the biggest threat this country faces. Subversion and the whole 9 yards with that. Now, on some of the other cases now that are finally being carried out, there's another one just recently as well. The Department of Justice said this: an indictment was unsealed today, this is just recently as well, charging Ping Li, 59, of Wesley Chapel, Florida, with conspiring to act as an agent of the People's Republic of China, PRC, without notification to the Attorney General, and with acting as an agent of the PRC without notification to the Attorney General. If convicted, it says, Li faces a maximum penalty of 15 years in prison. Further, it states the indictment alleges that Li was a U.S. citizen who immigrated to the United States from the PRC, from China. At various times, it says Li worked for a major U.S. telecommunications company and an international information technology company. From as early as 2012, Li allegedly served as a cooperative contact working at the direction of officers of the MSS, Ministry of State Security. Again, kind of like the CCP's combination of like an FBI, CIA, but working for an evil communist regime, right? And it says he did this to obtain information of interest to the PRC government. It notes that Li obtained a wide variety of information at the request of the MSS, including information concerning Chinese dissidents and pro-democracy advocates, members of the Falun Gong religious movement, and U.S.-based non-governmental organizations, and to report that information to the MSS. And notes that Li also provided the MSS with information obtained from his employer. It notes as well that Li used a variety of anonymous online accounts for the purpose of communicating with the MSS and traveled to China to the PRC to meet with the MSS. A few examples of this. It says, according to the indictment in August of 2012, an MSS officer requested that Li provide information about practitioners of Falun Gong and pro-democracy advocates in the United States. Now, notably, again, the Chinese Communist Party goes against people who threaten the, system of China, the pro-democracy activists, because if you support democracy, well, you probably oppose communism. And of course, the CCP regards democracy as a threat to its system. They regard the United States as a fundamental threat to their basic ideology. In fact, they believe that the American system cannot simultaneously exist in the same world as the communist system. They believe that communism, this is not just the CCP, but even the Soviets and others before it, that in order to achieve true communism, they need to destroy the Western ideologies of the Republic and democracy and the whole nine yards, that they cannot coexist. And you can't achieve true communism until you destroy freedom. Now, on the note of Falun Gong is, of course, one of the main religions persecuted in China. The Chinese Communist Party mainly persecutes Falun Gong, Muslim Uyghurs, Tibetans, Tibetan Buddhists, and they also persecute Christians, notably house Christians. The Christians who don't follow the CCP's altered version of the religion, because the CCP actually rewrote the Bible. They have altered parts of the Bible, and they also rewrote it so that you don't recognize a system higher than the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah, you can believe in religion, but if you believe in a morality higher than the Chinese Communist Party, you're a criminal. On the note of Falun Gong, of course, there were about 70 to 100 million people practicing Falun Gong in China, estimated by about 1999. The Chinese Communist Party declared it was a threat to the atheistic rule of the Communist Party, because what Falun Gong represented was a moral reawakening in China. It was a Qigong practice, kind of like Tai Chi, right? You see people doing slow movements in the parks in the morning. And what they taught, what they believed in, was the fundamental values of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance, trying to be a good person. The problem with the Chinese Communist Party is that the values of being honest and kind and forbearant, those undermine the basic system of the Chinese Communist Party, which teaches to struggle against people and to struggle against heaven. And so when people were trying to have this practice of refining their inner character, and notably even just becoming better people, the CCP declared that was a threat to their system. Notably as well because there were too many of them, 100 million. And so what did they do? Jiang Zemin, the head of the Chinese Communist Party at the time, said eradicate them. He said destroy their reputations, destroy them physically, bankrupt them. The CCP carried out a massive movement to arrest, kill, torture, harvest their organs, enslave them. They have re-education through labor. And that is what is still taking place in China. And then what happened? Well, the CCP never had a reason to do it. They fabricated reason, right? They used fake news and so on. They made up cases. Those cases got exposed as being fake. And when the Chinese Communist Party could no longer justify that, hey, we persecuted 1 out of every 15 or 14 people in the country who had family members and grandmas and kids and so on, they couldn't justify it. And so the CCP is terrified that the truth of what it did is going to get out. And so anybody talking about human rights in China, anybody exposing what the CCP did, the CCP regards them as a threat to its survival. And so that is why it extends these persecutions outside of China, because, well, people like me, frankly, we talk about it, we expose it. I should note, they don't just threaten Chinese people either. Personally, me investigating these things over the years, they have personally threatened to kill me on multiple occasions, including when I was working in Flushing, Queens, notably where some of these cases took place. I was surrounded one time by several individuals who threatened to kill me. I was told by one of them, in fact, a contact I had who was a pro-democracy activist when he was talking to me. He said after he talked to me, he said that Chinese agents approached him. They said they hired a hitman to chop off one of his hands. They slashed the tires of his car. I exposed it. They never did it. But this is the kind of stuff that people deal with if you're getting into exposing this type of stuff. Multiple times I've dealt with things like this, not in recent years, luckily, but especially during this time when it was a lot more severe. Now look, on this note, right, these cases being exposed, not all operations like this are just under the secret Chinese police stations, as I mentioned. The bigger network is the United Front Work Department, which includes these things. We'll be talking more about the CCP spy networks, though, only on EpochTV.com. That's the uncensored streaming platform of the Epoch Times. So if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, X, Rumble, there's a link in the description below. Click on that. You get access to the rest of this episode, as well as our whole library of shows and our hard-hitting documentaries on issues that really matter, like the Chinese Communist Party's 100-year plan to defeat the United States. The CCP is one of the biggest threats to this country. They're using things like propaganda, even video games, entertainment, culture, to subvert and influence the next generation. This unrestricted war against our country is one of the scariest but least understood issues of our time. Because, it's not tangible. It's all being done through soft power means and ideological subversion. Now, I've spent over a decade investigating the CCP subversion, and frankly, it's such an important issue that I made this documentary called The Final War, which exposes this 100-year plot of the CCP to take down America. Now, if you'd like to find out more what exactly the CCP is plotting against this country, watch The Final War. You can find the link in the description below, and I'll show you all the trailer before we go exclusively to EpochTV.com for the rest of this episode. I'll see you all there.
The greatest threat facing the United States is the CCP.
The Epoch Times investigation team had studied the CCP for years, but what we uncovered was yielding evidence beyond our imagination.
With Chairman Mao, with the Prime Minister, our talks have been characterized by frankness.
The Clinton administration said, oh, don't worry about it. This will be a poison pill for China.
China's strategic goal is to make sure that the U.S. has 4 enemies, and one of them must be a terrorist group.
We are giving of our life's blood so that the Chinese Communist Party can survive and thrive.